All right, well, we want to welcome everybody to CEC. We hope you're having a good virtual conference. We are excited to talk to you about 8 big ideas for facilitating impactful staff development. And this presentation is sort of geared towards supervisors because we'd like for supervisors and other kind of leaders who aren't trainers like us to know that you have the tools are out there for you to facilitate staff development, because we've heard from supervisors in our area that sometimes it's hard to make that be a part of your job when you're taking care of all the other staffing stuff that you have to do. So we wanted to give you tools as supervisors in early intervention, and really hopefully some of this can be used even out beyond early intervention, but give you some tools to be thinking about how can you weave this into your staff meetings and into your interactions with your staff, even things you can blast out to them by email to build their capacity and kind of build knowledge and skills. So my name's Dana Childress. I work in Virginia with the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. I'm one of our early intervention training, what is my title, right? Early intervention professional development consultant. It's early. Clearly, my brain's not quite engaged. But I work with Corey and Lisa, who will introduce themselves, on our state's professional development team. So we provide training, we do a lot of resource development, manage online resources for the early intervention practitioners in Virginia and their supervisors and the leaders in our state. So I'm going to pass it to Lisa to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Lisa Terry, and yes, I also work with Dana and Corey as an early intervention professional development consultant. Dana, got it. In my previous experience, I was also a supervisor of educators before, and I've also done a lot of training for new service coordinators as well as interns. And Corey, you're up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Corey Hill, and I'm the Early Intervention Professional Development Specialist. And my previous experience is that I was also the director of a local early intervention system prior to taking on this PD position. So glad to have you all join us.
Thanks, Corey and Lisa. So yeah, we're going to take a second to kind of, I think, share common experiences across hopefully you guys in our audience who are taking the time to watch the video, but across the three of us. So I don't think I mentioned to you, I have some supervisor experience too. I'll be honest, what I loved more was the practitioner stuff, but I did have some, I always think about it, I did some time as a supervisor and did some, lots of that kind of stuff, supervision, and lots of training about thinking about how I could support my staff's development, because training was something I love to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out some statements, and if you guys listening were live with us, we would have loved to have heard your answers, but we're just going to talk about them among ourselves. So as you hear these statements, think about them for yourself too, and think about how they might apply to you and your experience. So let's see. What I'm going to do is I'll read these out, and then you guys, maybe what we'll do, Corey and Lisa, you guys can wave at the camera or give a thumbs up if this is you, if you've experienced this, and we'll stop and talk about them as we go on. So have any of us provided a training that included coaching, mentoring, or performance feedback during training? So during the actual training, what do you think? Both of you have. So what did that look like for you, Lisa, when you can think about those kind of things, coaching, mentoring, or feedback during training? How do you do?
Yeah, so for me, when I was a supervisor before in Virginia Beach, I actually hosted a huge training on functional assessment. And one of the things that we did was we really had to do some prep work. So we analyzed some common themes around Ifsp plans and how they were involving and showing and documenting functional assessment. And then during the training, we provided that feedback. And so that was really interesting because everyone got some really good feedback that really applied to the training, and we got to talk about it.
Awesome. So you're not just teaching about functional assessment, you're having them reflect on it and give feedback during the training. That's awesome. So let's go to the next one. So have any of us ever provided a training that included some kind of coaching, mentoring, or feedback after training? All right, Corey's got the double wave. What did that look like for you, Corey? Thinking about the after.
One thing I didn't mention is that I also supervise graduate students who are in field placement for early intervention. So one of the things that we do is when I either join a visit with them that they're leading or I'm connecting virtually, is really having them reflect after the visit. We do a debrief kind of meeting where we talk about what did they think went well. And the way I always kind of frame it is, and if you could have a redo, what would you do differently? So thinking about the positives, but in the light of you have opportunities to learn from this and what could you try next time? Sometimes that might be that they revise what they would have done on a visit, or if they're in a classroom, revise their lesson plan and reflect on what they might want to try the next time.
Yeah, so there's kind of multiple components in there, like to support their learning and to help them grow, and they're not going to do that unless they reflect and think about it. So that's a great example. All right, let's try this one. Have we ever been to a training, felt really good about what we learned, then got back to work and struggled to implement it, or sort of fell back on old practices? Yeah, I think all three of us have done that over. Even as trainers, you think we should know better, right? But you still go to training. It's effort to take what you learned and use it. And you need support. And so that's what we want to talk about today with supervisors is what can you do to provide that support ongoing, maybe before training, maybe during training, and then certainly afterwards. That's so important. So here's one that I think the three of us can relate to too. Have you ever worried that people you trained or people on your staff might feel that same way? Or have you ever heard the same thing from them, that they go to training, get excited, and then come back and they can't figure out how to keep it going? What do you think? Lots of big, Lisa's like, yes, she's muted, but you can see. Tell me about that, Lisa.
Yeah, I think, like what happens is staff, they're excited to go to training because they want to learn and they want to grow. And then they go to this training and it's great information and they come back and they're so busy, they just get back in their routine. And so they haven't really had an opportunity to even reflect on how they're going to implement what they've learned or even revisited the information that they learned.
Yeah, because they just get back into it. And that's so common after training to just kind of fall back on what you already knew how to do. Even though you go to learn something, embedding it and integrating it into your work is hard. Did you have anything to add, Corey?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you all said. I think one of the other thing is that depending on who your trainees or your audience is, they get so revved up. I learned this great thing. We could try this, and then they get back to their people, to their team, and who weren't part of that excitement, and they get shot down. Like, yeah, we tried that 5 years ago and it didn't work, or that's not going to work for us, or supervisor Sally is not going to let us do that, and boom, it crashes you or the person who went to the training and was so revved up.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So I think that relates to where we're going today, really, Corey, because it's one thing to go as one person to a training and try to change your own personal practices, but I think change is more effective when it's kind of across people or with a system. And so your staff as a supervisor, you have your own system. So let's think about how to keep that from happening, like minimize the chances that you're going to send people to training and they're going to come back and not use it. One of the things that I think like I mentioned before, hear supervisors say is struggling to find the time for training, especially when you need to prioritize higher things like making sure all kids are seen, that there's no waiting lists in early intervention, or making sure that people are documenting correctly so that we're meeting monitoring requirements. Like there's a lot going on for supervisors. So figuring out how to prioritize staff training can be hard. It can also be hard because a lot of supervisors don't feel like they are trainers. That's a skill set that you're not necessarily given as a supervisor. So what we're hoping for today is that we can provide you with information to implement staff development to kind of get past that struggle. We've all been there. I'm imagining folks that have listened to us have been there, where you've been to something, or even more professional, you've paid to send your staff to training, and then it doesn't really have the impact you hoped. So we're going to share information today about from the professional development literature about like what do we know about ongoing professional development? What do we know about what's important when we think about staff development? And then what are some specific resources you can use to help your staff learn and grow? You'll hear us today use staff development, professional development interchangeably some. I think that's not uncommon to use them interchangeably. Staff development is probably a little more specific, like what I think of it like stuff you're doing in staff meetings and stuff you do day to day to support your staff's growth. But know that you might hear both of those, because I think for the three of us, we think about it all as learning, as helping your folks develop their professional practices. So today we are going to start by thinking about the who, what, and how of professional development and what information we have to help us know when we think about professional development or supporting staff learning, what do we need to keep in mind when we're planning? Then we're going to talk about 8 specific ideas for facilitating staff development, and we're going to integrate lots of resources so you can see examples of what we're talking about. And then we would encourage you after today to take time to plan, to really plan for staff development that actively engages whoever your learners are. And we want to encourage you to be thinking from the lens of ongoing support, which is the irony really of doing a one-time webinar or video session. Like, we know that this kind of training is not the best for changing practices. So it's on you to really stretch this further, but we're going to give you resource today to help you do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Corey to get us started to think about kind of the big picture of professional development.
Yeah, so I'm going to start by kind of throwing out to Dana and Lisa. And those of you who are listening, when you get started and thinking about what are the goals of facilitating staff development, why are you even doing this? So Lisa, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. I think, just for me personally, I kind of feel like it's my job to create an atmosphere of learning where everybody's eager, they're excited to really continually promote their own growth, because really it's up to us, but as supervisors, it's up to us to really set that tone and engage our staff in learning and make sure that they're excited about it.
How about you, Dana?
Yeah, I love that, Lisa, because I love the idea of a culture of learning. And I think the supervisor or the leader sets the stage for that and sort of cultivates that, because early intervention is not an easy job. And I think it's complex and it changes all the time. There's like ultimate flexibility required. So if we're not cultivating staff learning and development and their reflection on their practices and their problem solving and teaming together, I think it can get pretty stale and pretty frustrating. I heard in a training one time somebody talk about an early childhood training that said you wouldn't take your your child to a doctor who's still practicing medicine the way he learned to do it 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. You want the person who's the most up to date on the best practices for your child, for that doctor. And I think of early intervention like we talk about medical practice or legal practice. Early intervention is a practice, meaning we have to develop over time. So I think we owe families the same thing to keep current. And so it's on the supervisors, I think, to really help facilitate that. So that's to me, a big perspective that I look at staff development through.
Yeah, I think you guys hit so many cool things when you think about those goals of increasing awareness. That might be just making people aware of what's going on, excuse me, increasing their specific knowledge and skills. And those can be for different kinds of things. It may be practical policy kinds of things that they have to be able to do these skills versus much bigger, deeper family-centered practices and developing rapport and relationship. But ultimately, we really want the goal is that there's some changing of practice, that people can take what they learned in their staff development or their professional development and know how to use that in practice. How, we talk frequently, if you come to something that we provide, do you know what to do with it tomorrow when you're seeing a family? So I think that's one important thing. We also know, as we've talked about, that one-shot training is not going to be as impactful, because we know that adults learn by practicing and applying what they learn. So as you all are thinking about facilitating this kind of staff development, the important thing to remember is it might not be you that has to do that training. It might be that you're providing the support or the opportunity or the time. So we can go to the next slide, Dana. So we wanted to talk a little bit, the National Professional Development Center on Inclusion, or NPDCI, is how it was thrown around that, we have to have acronyms in early intervention. But that was the group that formed back in probably mid 2000s, and they started looking at a definition, and you'll see the definition from 2008. that professional development is facilitated teaching and learning experiences that are transactional and designed to support the acquisition of professional knowledge, skills, and dispositions, as well as the application of this knowledge in practice. And so there are so many powerful words within this definition. But we really have to think about, when we think about those goals of professional development, is who is our audience and what is the content, and then being able to match that. And so when you think about this definition, it's the idea of acquisition and application. Again, taking in that information, being able to apply it and use it. We can get to the next slide, Dana. So we want you to pause for just a minute and think about what roles have you experienced related to facilitating the professional development of staff. So I'm going to pause for just a second and let you think about that. So maybe you're actually a trainer. Maybe, again, as we talked about, you organize those training, or you provide support for staff who come back and help build things to maintain or advance their skills. And so you have to think about your role on that, and then figure out, once you have that information, figure out who's the best person to facilitate that training. If you are not the trainer, then how are you going to support what your staff are learning? I think the important thing as a supervisor is, even if you are not the trainer, it is important for you to know what is in the training and what the content. So when we started at the beginning, where I said, people come back and they're so excited, and then it kind of falls flat because Sally's supervisor won't. It's because she might not know what was the content. She missed it. So that's going to be a really important thing, because we know from the research that the supervisor support, especially if he or she is not the trainer, is going to be what's going to have the most impact on changing practices. So Dana, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Corey. So, right, like Corey said, you may or may not be the trainer, the actual person who stands up in front of your staff and facilitates the content. But it's really important, I think, for supervisors to understand the components of professional development when there's planning training for staff, because it's so easy to only think about the who and the what. Like, it's so easy to only think about who is being trained. I mean, we always think about that. Oftentimes training even bubbles up because the who needs something, right? So our who could be, and it just depends. I mean, really, these components apply to anybody, even outside of professional development, or outside of early intervention. But our who are often our service coordinators. There may be our developmental educators. It could be our PTs, OTs, and speech therapists. It could be the leaders themselves. But when we think about the who, it really varies. Even within that who is on your staff could vary really widely. Their own qualifications, their educational backgrounds, their interests. So planning for your who can be kind of challenging, but as a supervisor, you usually know who that is, and you know your people pretty well. When we think about the what is the other component that I think as supervisors and as trainers like us, we think a lot about. What is the content that needs to be trained? So like, what are the skills? What is the knowledge that we need to develop? Is it something new we want our staff to learn? Or is it where we see maybe some struggles among our staff, or they're asking for more training? I think when we figure out the what, it kind of gives us guidance on our outcomes and kind of the learning objectives for the training. Where do we need to go maybe to find that trainer that has that expertise to come train? So oftentimes when you are planning training, you spend a lot of time on the who and the what. And I'll say this for trainers too. That's what we ask. Who's going to be in the audience? What do they need to learn? But what we've found with research into professional development is we actually don't spend enough time thinking about the how. And the how of professional development is, you need the who and the what to pull together training at all. But if you don't think about the how, then you end up in the situations we talked about at the beginning, where you have folks going to training listening to a lecture for 4 hours, half day training, and then coming back and really struggling to use what they learned. So the how is so key when we want to think about, especially that application piece that Corey just mentioned, which is part of our professional development definition. So let's think a little bit more about that how and what good professional development or good staff training looks like. So I think Corey mentioned this one, and I did too. It's pretty clear in the professional development research, and I could have added lots and lots. Oh, it looks like our citations got cut off. That's okay. But so I could have added a lot more than just those. We know pretty strongly that one-time face-to-face workshops have been found to be overall pretty ineffective when we want to change practices. They're pretty good at raising awareness, building some knowledge, they're pretty good awareness level, but not so good when we want to change practices. I would venture to bet, and I don't know, I haven't looked at the research for this yet, but the single webinar is probably in the same boat, right? Which is, I know we all acknowledge the irony of here, you are listening to one of those. But we're thinking about changing practices, and we think about changing practices, we've got to think beyond that single workshop. So it doesn't mean don't hold workshops for your staff, because that's a key part of how we share knowledge across the field. But what we want you to do is to think more about that how, and what can you integrate maybe before, what could you ask your trainer or do yourself to integrate during, and what can you really do? It's the after that's so important too, to help those practices change, because it takes time to change them. So let's look at some examples from the literature of what makes that impact. So when we think about impactful learning opportunities, the research suggests us that we need to incorporate multiple methods for learning, so multiple ways of receiving the instruction, multiple opportunities. So these are three of the most impactful learning opportunities, or I guess, opportunities to support learning. Content-based learning that actively engages the learner in the learning process. So that first bullet there, we can't get away from content learning. Like, content-based learning is what we do, but it's not enough just to talk to somebody about it for an hour. We need to figure out how to actively engage the learner in the learner process, because adult learners are automatically thinking about what you're saying, comparing it to what they already know. And if it matches with what they know, great, the learning process is easier. It's when it doesn't match that we want to engage them further to kind of challenge their thinking and their practices, because that's how you grow. You can't grow otherwise. So active engagement and reflection are actually really, really key points with adult learning. When you think about the second bullet here, we have ongoing coaching or mentoring to support learners' ability to generalize and sustain that learning. So we want to think about, when you're planning training or providing it, what are the things you can do after the training on an ongoing basis to support that learner's ability to use what they learned in multiple situations, right, to generalize, and then to sustain it, to keep those practices going, because it's so easy to slide back into what they were doing before training. I haven't been able to yet find any studies that tell us how much ongoing coaching will work. Like, there's no magic amount of weeks or sessions or whatever. There's some research I've come across that said even 1 or 2 sessions, even 1 or 2 somethings after, whether it's a supervision meeting or a video observation or reflection session, whatever, after the training can be really impactful. So as supervisors, we encourage you to be thinking about, what can I do? Send my staff to training, and then maybe we're going to talk about it, some focused discussion or some case studies or something during staff meeting for the next couple of months. So, there's lots of different ways to be thinking about that ongoing piece. And then the final bullet here is learners' self-mastery of understanding, application, or self-assessment of application and mastery. So self-assessment sometimes gives people the willies, because you're thinking about somebody's going to judge you. You're not really judging yourself. Self-assessment is to compare your practices against a standard. It's really hard to know if you're doing it right, if you're doing it to fidelity, a certain practice, if you don't take the time to examine, are you practicing the steps that you've been taught? So there are tons of checklists and stuff, and we're going to talk about that in a little while, that you can use with your staff to help them do this kind of reflection, and then work with them based on what they find in the self-assessment, figure out what other support they still need. So we want to think about actively engaging our learners, planning for ongoing support afterwards, and building in opportunities for them to assess their own learning and practice. The application piece is super important. So let me ask you guys, when we think about, I think from our own practices as trainers, let's think about some examples here. So maybe I'll throw it to you first, Lisa. What are some ways that you have kind of creatively engaged learners when you had content to teach? And, either like in your position now or when you were a supervisor?
Yeah, I feel like one of the way, I mean, I always try to incorporate some kind of interactive activities, but I think one of the most successful, and it's probably always the most awkward, is like I like to call it skill building instead of role playing, because skill building sounds a lot nicer and less scary and it takes the fear out of role playing. But every time I have new staff, they really kind of just stumble on how do I explain this to families? How do I engage them in these conversations about some of these hard things? And so we take roles and we really practice it so that way they can really navigate their language and their words that they're using when they're speaking to families, and I can be the parent or the caregiver, and as they're going, then I can help prompt them too, and then we have a good discussion about it. And so that's probably honestly one of my favorite activities. All my staff that I've done it with, they were always like, I hated it when you did that to me, but I learned so much and I felt so much more confident before I went into the homes and I actually talked to the families and we did this.
Yeah, Lisa, me, I am not team role play. Like, it gives me the willies to be in a role play as a trainer. So it's sort of funny. But what occurs to me is that you're pushing your staff out of their comfort zone, which is not a bad thing. And sometimes we really like being situated in our comfort zone. So you'd have to push me out of my comfort zone for the role play because of the sort of acting part of it. But I also was thinking too, as you're talking, like having multiple ways to engage different learners. Like for me, I would do it and I'm sure I would learn for it, but I wouldn't be very comfortable with it. So that doesn't mean you don't do it. It could be there's another way you also support me as a learner. You know what I mean? As a trainer and as a supervisor, you've got different tools in your toolbox. So that's a great example, I think, because it's like giving them practice, like almost like the muscle memory, motor planning, auditory planning or whatever for what to do with families in the moment. Corey, I think you talked a little bit about ongoing coaching and stuff with your students. I don't know if you have any other ideas about the engaging piece or the coaching piece. What do you think?
I think, again, so my students have to do reflective journals too. And one of the ways that I feel like I can coach or mentor is, first of all, I'm not looking at that like grading. I'm looking at that. What are you reflecting on? How are you able to generalize and apply that kind of thing? So when my students get things back with input from me, I am using my coaching knowledge to ask some of those really good open-ended questions, or something that will generate that analysis of this didn't go so well, this did go so well, and really thinking about change in their thought process or in their practice. So I think that's how I can weave that kind of thing in.
Yeah, and you know what occurred to me, like I thought supervisors could use that journaling kind of an idea, even if it's a journaling through an email kind of exchange or something. Another idea that popped up for me when you said that was like video observations or video self-reflection, like which would kind of we could weave in the third bullet. Like if you had our staff do a journal or take a video of themselves on a visit with parent permission, then they could get the opportunity to help get that reflection with the supervisor, and they could also kind of look at what they did and compare it, do their own self-assessment. Am I practicing what I learned? If not, where can I grow? So there's all kinds of different ways I think we could weave this together. So thank you guys.
And Dana,
yeah.
oh, sorry. And Dana, with that too, you could also use one of their colleagues in their class, like have their friend that's in the class and review it together. That's another kind of comfortable, especially if they can pick, I want this person to sit with me and watch my video for a second time. So something else we've done.
That's a great idea. I know there's a study that like a long-term study of family guided routines-based intervention, and they one of the ways they supported their people after the training was everybody had to turn in videos of intervention visits. And the researcher, who I think was like the coach, would look, I can't remember if the practitioners identified this or the coach did, it might've been the practitioner. They sent a little clip of something they did really well. And then there was a clip of something where they maybe missed the mark. And then instead of having a one-on-one where you're kind of uncomfortable, they did it in pairs. So it would be like if I was the coach, I would be meeting with 2 early interventionists and we're all 3 watching the video clips together. So it's a conversation. So same idea, Corey. I thought that was kind of a cool idea with little 10-minute clips. So it didn't take super long. I just think you learn so much by seeing yourself and seeing somebody else do it, like the good and the bad, right? All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to Corey because we're going to start transitioning and taking this information we've talked about and showing you how to apply it with a host of resources with our 8 ideas.
So I think we've really hit on that idea of we don't agree with that one shot webinar workshop, that we really want to support our participants to be actively engaged and do lots of reflecting. So as Dana said, we're going to give 8 ideas that hopefully you'll be able to try some of these in practice. Again, what can you use tomorrow after you've listened to this webinar today? So we can go to the next slide, please, Dana. We're going to show you lots of different resources, and then again, try to share some of that engagement and reflective opportunities. So the first one that we are going to talk about is watching an archived webinar and then spending some time debriefing together. We strongly encourage you, when you think about that debriefing time, that it's not just kind of a free-for-all, that there can be some opportunity, but that you also think about what are those guided questions you want people to think about, what kind of reflection, and there are lots of websites that offer free webinars. We are going to show you one from our website. We also want to just throw out that the Texas Early Childhood site, as well as the Illinois Early Intervention Training Program, offer lots of webinars for free. But what we're going to show you is a webinar series that we call Talks on Tuesdays. They are either one episode or they're 2-part. But what we pair it with then is, so a supervisor could ask staff ahead of time to watch that Talks on Tuesday, or they could watch it together. And then we have what we call a learning bite, and it's really designed as a staff development activity. So you've watched this webinar, and then the learning bite is kind of all laid out for the supervisor that what's the purpose, what the resources, like all the way down to you're going to need some markers, you're going to need this handout. And then it gives very specific steps about how you can facilitate that discussion. We have some of the guided questions in there, some of the anticipated responses. And then we always give some resources that might build that capacity. So on screen, you see a Talks on Tuesday about cultural competence. At the end of the learning bite, there might be 2 or 3 resources that if people want more information, again, you're kind of extending their learning. All right, so let's see. I think, Dana, are you going to take the next one?
Yep, I sure can. So our second idea was to facilitate a discussion with your staff using blog posts. So, you know, we've heard from supervisors, it's hard sometimes to have the time to come up with these activities, something for staff meeting beyond just a discussion. So it's hard to come up with scenarios, for example, or challenging things, kind of discussions that help your staff get beyond what often happens, I mean, honestly, is venting about things that are hard and kind of take the time for that, but then get them to some problem solving. So we're going to highlight 2 blogs. The first one here is EI Excellence. I just realized they have kind of, this is their site, is EI Excellence, is out of North Carolina. And they have a blog that I always call the EI Excellence blog, but it's actually called Coach to Go. So I think it's a great idea to check this out. I wish I had the URL on screen, but you can just Google Coach to Go EI Excellence and it will come up. They've got a lot of really good things. And on their site, they actually have some videos and other things. So it's a good resource for staff development. Early Intervention Strategies for Success is our blog. it's really designed to focus on helping people think about their practices and building some knowledge about skills. A lot of our posts are designed so they include a scenario, like some kind of a real world little paragraph or two scenario, then some either tips and strategies or reflection questions kind of to help you think about what good practices would look like to address the scenario. And then the blog ends with an open-ended question or two that's like a discussion question. So we've heard from early intervention programs that they have downloaded the blog posts. They're all downloadable as a PDF. And either when they were doing face-to-face staff meetings, which was before the pandemic, talking about it during staff meetings. So everybody would read the blog post together, answer the kind of discuss the open-ended questions at the end, which would lead to a discussion kind of grounded in their own experience for some problem solving or learning. If you're still meeting with your staff virtually, these would be easy to just take the URL and share it or open up the blog post, I suppose. And I suppose you could read it together, but it'd probably be easiest to share it out. We've got a search feature, so you can just search in whatever topic you're interested in and see what comes up. One of the posts that I think gets some of the most, that would probably be the most useful for this kind of thing, is a series that we have called What Would You Do? So there's a whole series of things like, I think there's one about the child care teacher wanting you to take the child out of the classroom. What do you do? There's ones about the parent wants to leave the child with you so she can run to the store. What do you do? Like all kinds of real world situations that your staff have probably walked up against. The parent sends you a Facebook friend request. What do you do? So there's kind of a short discussion. There may be 600 to 100 to 1200 words, and it helps you have that discussion, especially when you need to talk about things that might be challenging among staff or with individual staff. I've heard of people too sending like the Facebook friend request to a staff person who's maybe experienced that for some ideas about how to handle it. So the blog posts are kind of ongoing. Both sites post periodically. So I encourage you to think about subscribing and keeping an eye out for these as a resource when you just want a kind of a quick activity to do with your staff. So I'm going to pass it over to Lisa for our third idea.
Thanks, Dana. So our third idea is complete self-assessment checklist to reflect on strengths and gain insights. And what I really love about this is, well, before as an employee, I loved having tools. Give me some tools to use that are available. I didn't always know where to go. I didn't know what to look for, but I was a big fan of tools. So every time my supervisor would give me tools, I would use them. Naturally, now I still love tools. But what Dana was talking about earlier, she was talking about adult learners and how, you really have to reflect on your own practices. And that's what these self-assessment checklists really make you do, because they make you question what's going on, what am I doing, what can I do better? So the Division of Early Childhood and the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, they have great checklists and their self-assessment checklists that practitioners can use to actually see, okay, well, how am I doing? They're all centered around the Division of Early Childhood's recommended practices. So there's different topic areas. For example, there's environment, there's family, there's even leadership ones. So you could even use a self-assessment checklist for your own self as a supervisor. But what you would do is you would look at the description, you would look at each of the questions and say, okay, well, how am I doing on this? Am I doing great? Am I doing not so great? You could write comments on yourself, and then you could really say, okay, well, this is an area that I clearly need to grow. And so that's one resource. Another checklist is on our website, on our Early Intervention Professional Development website. We have checklists such as this one that's on the screen, are key characteristics of well-written Ifsp outcomes. So this is really looking at, okay, the practical piece of it. Okay, so how am I doing writing goals? And they can go through and check, like, am I making sure that it's strength-based? Am I focusing on the family's hopes and the priorities? And so these two checklists are just some examples, but let's talk about how you can actually implement them into practice as a supervisor. How can you provide that professional development? So let's think about that a little bit. So if you feel free to explore all of these websites. access these checklists, get familiar with them. So that way, you know, the tools that you can pull out for different employees, because you might have one staff that maybe needs to focus a little bit more on parent engagement. So you might focus on those checklists and pull that out. But what you could do is you could provide this tool to your staff, say, hey, go out, have a few visits, come back, and during our supervision meeting, let's talk about it. Let's reflect together. And so you're really getting some insight. I know, like, sometimes I've had these supervision meetings where my staff comes in and I'm like, so how's everything going? And it's just, you know, I don't know where to go all the time. I don't have anything to guide me. There's no content, there's no feedback from what's going on in the field. And so these checklists really do help give you some content. They give you some information, and it really guides your conversation so you can go a little bit deeper with staff. And then if there is any areas of growth that the staff identifies, then this would let you know, okay, well, maybe we need to provide a little bit more support around that. And then if there's strengths, that's even better, because now you can add these to any of the staff feedback, their performance evaluations, things like that. So you're getting so much information, and it's so helpful. And as you do this with more staff, you can identify trends in your whole program. And then you can really focus on some of those other things where you might need to do a larger staff training around a certain topic. So that's just one way that you guys can use that. And just remember, these things can be used before trainings too. So if you are going to host a big training, you can do it before a training, you can do it during a training, you can even do it after a training. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. I believe, Corey, you're going to talk about idea number 4.
Yeah, we're cruising right through our ideas. So the next one, you guys, who doesn't want videos? People are clamoring for videos. That's all we ever hear. Let me see what it looks like in practice. Show me where I can find videos. We've talked about ideas about video observations of reflecting on the practitioner's practice and how you can do that. But we also, the body of early intervention videos is growing, something that we have wanted to see for a really long time. So we're going to hit just a couple of the ones that we think you can find some really good information. On your screen, you see in the upper left-hand corner, the family guided routines-based interventions. And that's one that has a lot of really good coaching examples and really showing the early intervention visit with the coaching components woven in. Right below that, you will see again, our site, the Virginia Early Intervention Professional Development videos. Again, that is something that we're trying to build as part of our professional development team. One of the things that we sometimes do when we are using a clip or a piece in training is we even have these video reflection forms, like again, what went well, what could be done differently, but also what was your big takeaway, or what was your aha moment, what struck you, um, getting them to think about that. And then also thinking about, is there somebody they might want to share this video with? So we have a lot of different videos on our site that you are welcome to check out. Everything that we're showing you is free resources. Then over on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the early intervention video library. Again, that's a place that we are starting. We help pull that all together, but the videos have been kind of reviewed, but we're pulling videos from across the country that early interventionists can use to get to see things in practice. And then the last one that you see on your screen, Lisa mentioned the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. Specifically to the pandemic, there's a really nice one that Larry Edelman just put out about preschool during the pandemic, early childhood education in extraordinary times. don't let the preschool, if you're specifically early intervention, don't let the preschool kind of catch you up that it's not going to be applicable, because it really is applicable for so much of what we're doing in early intervention. So those are some really great resources where you can just go and find videos. And then again, the idea of making your own videos during practices. All right, let's go to idea number 5.
Okay, so idea number 5 is share and process free journal articles together across disciplines. So earlier, Dana mentioned that she does not like role play, but however, if you really want to pull on her heartstrings, you would use journal articles. So there are different ways that you can reach your participants. So you have to really think about adult learners and how to reach them. So this is a different way to reach them. And these are free. You can really find a lot of free journals are out there. And so we're going to go through a few of them. So you'll see infants and young children. So they'll have free articles, the Journal of Pediatrics, and also Google Scholar. So you can look at all 3 of these for free journals. That's one way to access that. And so what I always love to do too when I'm searching is I always put .pdf at the end, because I want to make sure that the Adobe file like shows up. So I'm not clicking and searching, where do I go? How do I open it? So that's just another extra little tidbit of information. And it's so funny because I'll admit, before I used to work in a program where we had these journal articles that would go around. So you would sign your name after you read them, and it would sit under my desk, or sometimes I would lose them and I would feel so terrible. So let's think about how to actually make this useful and not something that just kind of goes around and gets lost in translation. So some ways that you can use them is you could start a journal book club, well, journal club, I guess. You could start a journal club. So people that are really interested in it, like Dana, she could be a part of that, and you guys could all meet about it. But you can even go further than that, and that journal club can share and report like the relevant information that they've learned from those articles. Another way that you can do about it is you can give the article to everyone in staff and say, okay, we are going to talk about this at our next staff meeting. Go ahead and read it. So you have that accountability piece, because that's what I was lacking before. I didn't have anybody holding me accountable. So you have that accountability piece, but then you're debriefing about it together. You're really holding a good conversation. And that's something I would have loved, because just talk to me about it. Like, let's have a conversation about it. And if you need access, some other ways you can access journal articles, if you know anybody from other disciplines that are getting articles, invite them to share some of those resources. You could also, if you have a university connection that has access to a journal library, utilize that person. So really know who your ins and outs are with journal articles, and that will really help. And then as you're talking about it, then really just debrief about the different ideas, the different concepts, what's relevant. One thing about journal articles, they're always publishing what the hot topics are right now, and they're relevant in the field, but it really makes hold your own program accountable, that you're really staying up to date on what the evidence-based practices are. So let's go to the next one. So idea number 6, conduct peer reviews of IFSPs, IEPs, progress notes, etc. I am a huge fan of this because I love tools. I said that already. I love tools. And what these kind of worksheets do is they really look at, okay, how am I really doing? So it's looking at your data, your actual plans, and you get to evaluate a peer, so you're still learning. So for example, the Enhancing Functional Assessment Worksheet. This is where you would pull out an IFSP, or you would have your staff, you would have them bring their IFSP plans or IEP plans to a meeting, and then they would exchange, each of them would get a checklist, and then they would exchange it with a peer. And then they're going to go through and help identify, okay, like, does it include this? Does it have multidisciplinary assessment? Is it documenting the child's strengths and their needs? Yes or no, any kind of comments. And so as they're going through, whoever is doing the peer review, they're learning. because they're like, oh, they're seeing something in a different way. I don't know about you, but every time I look at somebody else's plans, I'm like, oh, that's a great way to word that, or I've never thought about that before. So they're learning too, and they're also learning, okay, so this is the tool, this is some of these things that are recommended. Am I even doing that on my plan? So they're also self-reflecting with themselves. So that's a way, and then they could pass it and they can share and really generate a discussion and provide feedback. Another tool that you can use, and it's another great one because it's really hands-on in the field, is coaching families during service coordination. So this is a tool where you're actually going out, you're observing a service coordinator, and then you're documenting. And well, I don't even want to say documenting because that has such a negative like tone to it. And that's what you have to like realize, like this is not something where we're being judgmental. Again, we have to go back to creating that safe learning atmosphere. Like, we want to grow. Tell me what I can do. Give me some constructive criticism. But they could join a peer and they could really reflect on their practices. Like, did you reflect on the joint plan from the very beginning of the session? Did you respond to the caregivers and attend to their needs and comfort? And then you're saying, yes, I observed this, or no, that wasn't really applicable in the situation. And then you have feedback and you provide that. So that's another great way that you can do that. And I think that these are really beneficial because it's really looking at the practices that are going on in reality. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Dana for idea number 7.
So Lisa, I think we have figured out what we both love, right? Lisa loves role play and tools, and I'm hashtag journal article. I think this is super funny. We're learning about each other today. So let me share with you guys idea number 7. This one is all about kind of just-in-time learning. So listen to a podcast and share ideas for practice implementation. So we're going to highlight our podcast, EI on the Fly. It's a podcast that we've been hosting with a colleague from Massachusetts. I was trying to think of how long, I guess a year and a half. Right now, EI on the Fly is available. Like if you Google it, you can usually find it. It's usually should be available most places you get your podcasts. I know it's iTunes, Google Podcasts, a couple different places. But it's also on Podbean. That's where it's hosted. So anyway, lots of different places to find it. Right now, the EI on the Fly podcast has 2 series. We have one on functional assessment and one on teaming and collaboration. And each series, when you look it up, you can find the title, and some of them are titled, you know, you can listen specific to the title. If there's particular things like implicit bias that you want your staff to learn about, you might just pull that episode. Or you could make this available to your staff to listen to together, maybe come up with a schedule that everybody's going to listen to episode 1 this week, episode 2. The nice thing about, I think, about the way we design the podcasts are, we wanted early interventionists to be able to listen to them in the car, or I guess that's not as relevant right now, and not many people are traveling between visits, but we wanted, ideally, with all the travel that we know early interventionists to do, that sort of space between visits, we wanted these to be a sort of a just-in-time, accessible professional development resource. So the podcast episodes, they vary from probably about 25 minutes to, I think our longest episode is right around 45 minutes. I think that one we were talking about Ifsp development, and we just kept talking, but we tried to keep them relatively short. So they're sort of short bursts of hearing 2 folks from early intervention backgrounds talking about the sort of strategies. What does practice look like? Good practices look like. What does implementation look like? Generally building on, pulling from my own experiences. And then my co-host on EI on the Fly has a daughter who recently graduated from early intervention. So she shares some really good stories from the parent perspective too. So some of the ways you could use the podcast, like I said, you could encourage your staff to listen, or even help them make time in their day for a little bit of time of professional development to listen, maybe before a meeting where you're going to get together and discuss what you heard on the podcast. Maybe ask your staff, how does what you heard match or not match with your practices, or even with your experience? And how could you use what you learned with the families you're working with? And that can be a good question, because sometimes when folks are hearing a sort of exemplars in training, they think, oh, well, that's not how it works with my families, or that's not how it works with, my community, or I don't think we could ever use that. And I would encourage you to challenge your staff on thinking about this, because recommended practices in one form or the other, right, should be able to work across the field. But we all know, all of us are early interventionists, that you have to individualize them and tweak them. So having that practice, implementation, and problem solving time around a podcast episode can be really helpful. We encourage you to think about how to help your staffs make the connection between what they're hearing and what they're doing. And sometimes you can do that through connecting some of these different ideas. Maybe you listen to a podcast on the functional assessment series, and maybe you go watch a video of a functional assessment, and then you videotape your staff, and then you reflect. So there's ways to sort of weave these ideas together to create a learning opportunity that can go across time and maybe meet the needs of different kinds of learners too. The other thing I'll tell you is, here's a little secret. It's actually not that hard to record a podcast. Now, I say that as the person recording it. You need some skill with syncing the audio together and posting it. But maybe there's a way in your staff, you guys could record audio files for each other between visits of something that went really well. Or here's a tip for explaining the child outcome summary process. Or here's a tip for working, helping families transition. And you could accumulate your own files to share among your staff. I mean, it's just kind of another creative way to share some ideas. So you might be able to take the podcast idea, listen to it, but maybe there's some way to develop something on your own. We would love to have some other early intervention podcasts out there. So I'm going to throw it back to Lisa for our 8th idea.
All right. So the 8th idea is share scenarios from recent experiences for collaborative problem solving. So this, I also really am a huge fan of this one, because this is where staff is really, they're sharing their recent experiences, or as they're in the field, if there's things that come up that they're really having a challenging time with, then you can really meet together and have all these different perspectives around the table that are helping that staff member to reflect and really problem solve the case together. So what you do is you would have a set time during your staff meeting. So make sure that it's a reserved time that's really dedicated to that staff member sharing cases or staff members sharing cases. And then you want to talk about, okay, well, what's going really well? What's really challenging about that situation? The one thing I will say is, you don't want staff, and this is really, really hard, and this is a skill you're going to have to model, but you don't want staff to just jump in and fix it. You don't want them to say, well, you should do this, 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 and this. Nobody wants to hear that. So you really have to pause, and you have to say, okay, invite staff to ask open-ended questions, ask reflective questions. Okay, well, tell me what you've tried already. What have you done about this? And really go a lot deeper in it, because you really ultimately want that staff member to really self-reflect on their own practices as well, and really think about, okay, well, how can I do this, or what else can I do? But it's really great because everyone's sharing their perspectives, and so it's a huge learning environment here. If you don't use those scenarios, you can also use scenarios from videos, blogs, any other resources that we've already talked about today. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Dana, for number 9, and then we are going to close up.
Yep, so we decided to give you guys a bonus idea. I know the title of the session said 8 ideas, but as we were reviewing our PowerPoints, Lisa had a great idea to add an extra in here. So your bonus idea is about hosting a book study to grow knowledge and skills and encourage that reflection that we've all talked about today. So, hosting a book study could be as simple as you and your staff identify a book that's going to build skills or, lead to some discussion, maybe some of that collaborative problem solving, and you just read it together, come together and talk about what you've learned. You could formalize it a little bit more by having some reflection questions, some guiding statements and things to help your staff kind of dig deeper and really think about what they're learning, compare it to what they already know, kind of go back to that self-assessment of mastery, that kind of ideas. And so if you want to do that, we have 2 resources on the web, on our screen here for some examples. So the Coaching Facilitation Guide is a resource that we developed in Virginia. It's a book study guide that goes along with the Rush and Sheldon's Early Childhood Coaching Handbook, the 1st edition. I haven't had a chance to go back and kind of compare this one with their 2nd edition, but I would think there'd be overlap. The Coaching Facilitation Guide is really a series of, I believe it's 6 sections that has just lots of activities that you can pull from depending on what you want to explore with your staff. And there's guidance in there about how the activities and the sections line up with the chapters of the book. So it's a resource that you can use to really host a formal book study where all your staff have a copy of that book, or you can use that as a bounce off point and pull some activities in here for just staff meeting kinds of activities as you're working on coaching. The other resource here, we have developed a leadership book study around Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead. And so we've kind of developed a facilitation guide, but I wanted to point out her website is really cool because she has a Dare to Lead hub that has tons of stuff to make it easy to facilitate a book study. So if you're looking at a book, go check the author's website or the publisher's website. Sometimes they've already developed materials that help you facilitate the book study, so you don't have to do what we had to do with the coaching facilitation guide and put it all together ourselves. So, think about, it's a great way to take advantage of the interests of your staff too. You might have staff that are really interested in something and want to share it with everybody else. Maybe your staff person could lead the book study and you tag along. There's maybe ways to sort of share the responsibility of staff development by pulling in your staff and helping them share their interests with other people. So that's the bonus idea for today. So we hope you've gotten 8 ideas, like Lisa said, tons of tools and resources to help you with your staff to come up with some staff development ideas. So we encourage you to take a moment now and think about what's your plan for using what you learned today, and jot down a note or type yourself a quick email and send it to yourself that says these 2 ideas I want to try over the next 2 months. Another idea you can do is put a notification on your phone or on your calendar to remind yourself to revisit these ideas over the course of time. Maybe you're going to revisit the handout for this PowerPoint, this presentation once a month for the next 8 months or 9 months. You've got ideas and you're going to think about how you can use some of these resources to create 9 months worth of staff development. So we hope you'll take some time to do that. We'll make the URLs for the resources available to you today in a handout. And you're welcome to email any of the 3 of us or all 3 of us if you want ideas. Lisa will be the go-to person for ideas on role play. I'll just go ahead and say that one. But go ahead and reach out to us if you need any other ideas, have any questions, and we will be present during the airing of this video with CEC Live. So if you have questions or comments, feel free to use the Q&A on the platform, and we'll be there to answer questions too. So thank you for taking time with us. We hope these have been useful for us, and feel free to get in touch. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.